Hi, this is Leia, and this is going to be my mental health leadership project called Unmasking the Intersections. Today, we're going to be focusing on where does gender, depression, and autism interact with each other, focusing on the effects of being undiagnosed with ASD, and what is the significance of unmasking these intersections. There are many ways depression, gender, and being autistic can affect each other, and how they intertwine can be difficult to dissect, but today we're unpacking all of it. We're specifically looking at the reasons for an imbalance between diagnosis of autistic women and girls compared to their male counterparts, and why autistic people are more likely to develop depression. Understanding how these different parts interact can tell us a lot about our own points of view and how we can change them to start to understand and support the ASD community. The first section we're going to be focusing on is the intersections between autism and gender. So the questions we're going to be looking at is, why is there an imbalance ratio of late diagnosed autistic women compared to men? Do symptoms differ between girls and boys? How do societal expectations of each gender affect the way people interpret symptoms? There are several factors that result in an imbalanced ratio of late diagnosed autistic women compared to autistic men. The number one reason for undiagnosed autistic women being more common is that the autistic traits were not detected in childhood. There are many ways autistic girls and women differ from autistic boys and men, whether it's environmental, societal, social, or biological. The source is sometimes unclear. One thing is for sure is that autistic brains tend to develop differently based on gender. Autistic boys have a difference in their frontal lobe that controls motor controls that the majority of autistic girls do not have. This change affects their gross motor skills like walking, crawling, jumping, sitting, and a lot more. This can affect their baby milestones, which are usually detected by a doctor and parents immediately. While girls tend to have issues with their fine motor skills like writing, getting dressed, cutting, and opening things. These skills are usually seen as smaller milestones than gross motor skills and may go undetected, especially because these traits will come later in development. The way girls go undiagnosed in childhood is also because of environmental and societal factors for girls. Some autistic traits can be mistaken to be typical for traits for girls to have. These symptoms include stimming, which means stimulating behaviors. Some typical stims detected for autism have been majorly based on research on boys, which includes physical stims like spinning, hand flapping, rocking, and a lot of noticeable movements. A lot of girls and women have this, but in public, women's stims are a little bit more subtle, like nail biting, hair twirling, repeating phrases, and touch-based stims. This could be because girls are subjugated into masking their symptoms. Smaller stims means that they can regulate themselves without notice by peers or others. This topic of masking is very important to note because masking is one of the biggest reasons for undiagnosed autistic people. Even though many autistic people learn to mask, autistic girls and women have a higher chance to mask compared to boys and men. Masking is the term for neurodivergent people hiding their traits by copying others' behaviors. Many autistic people do this by rehearsing conversations, changing their facial expressions to match others, learning social rules manually, suppressing stims, and many, many more. Since autistic girls are more susceptible to masking to avoid negative treatment from peers, this causes the symptoms to go undiagnosed for even longer. Lastly is how society creates a financial block on getting diagnosed. According to the Canadian Women's Foundation, there is a 17.1% difference between median women's wages versus median men's wages. And in self-employed people, there is a 28% difference. Another hurdle that stops autistic people from getting a diagnosis is the rate of unemployment, which is 76 to 90% of autistic people are unemployed. The cost to get a diagnosis in Canada is around $2,000 to $3,000 to even get seen. Since women around the world are affected by the wage gap, it might not even be possible for a lot of autistic people, and especially women, to get a diagnosis and receive the support that they need. The next section we're going to be going over is the DSM for autism and its history. When diagnosing autism, the DSM-5 is used to check off traits of autism. It is based off previous diagnoses for autism and research of behaviors that is associated with it. These traits include 5 sections of behavior, which includes A. Persistent deficits in social communication and social interactions across multiple contexts as manifested by the following, currently or by history. B is restricted repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities as manifested by at least 2 of the following, currently or by history. C is symptoms must be present in early developmental period, but may not be fully manifested until social demands exceeds limited capacities, or may be masked by learned strategies later in life. D is symptoms can cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. And E, these disturbances are not better explained by an intellectual disability. These traits don't differ between females and males, but the way these traits tend to apply to each other may show up differently. The research on the symptoms of these traits have mostly been recorded with the bias of diagnosed boys. In a research article on the original testing for autism in 1943, Leo Kanner, MD, concluded that the diagnosis of autism was a ratio of 4 to 1 girls. This is because when creating tests for autism traits, they often use traits found in non-masking boys. A lot of research before the modern understanding is based on Hans Asperger's research, a physician who defined autistic psychopathy in 1944 and created the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. His work was rooted in anti-Semitism, and he only studied males. Much of his work was used to identify traits and symptoms of autism that was used in the past DSM. This meant that before the modern DSM in 2013, there has not been a lot of acknowledgement towards traits in female autism, and how many girls now and women were missed or left undiagnosed from that era. Okay, the DSM has changed significantly throughout the year. When it was first researched, it was thought to be childhood schizophrenia, until the DSM-3 in 1968, where it was first changed to infantile autism, and then later just autism. Only recently, in 2013 to now, the DSM-5 has acknowledged how masking may affect how people present traits. The diagnosis process for autism is very complex due to the fact that symptoms of autism shares very similar traits to other diagnoses in the DSM, especially BPD, anxiety disorder, ADHD, and many others that include social withdrawal, mood swings, and intellectual difficulties. Another possibility is that the person has several neurodivergencies or mental illness along with autism. This can affect the diagnostic requirement that, quote-unquote, no other intellectual disability is a better explanation for these traits. So, to summarize, the imbalance ratio between late diagnosed autistic women compared to men is primarily due to girls being missed in childhood because of the biological differences of how traits among girls present in motor skills and baby milestones. Then, the push from society to suppress their traits or present them in a way that is acceptable for girls would lead them to mask. This leaves girls with autism undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and when they discover it for themselves, getting diagnosis costs upward from $2,000 to $3,000. Once they get into an office, the biases, lack of research on female traits, and high masking may still leave women without a diagnosis or being misdiagnosed. That is why there is such a large difference between undiagnosed or late diagnosed women compared to men. Next section we're going to tackle is the intersections between autism and major depression. Some of the questions we're going to be tackling in this section is, how does being autistic affect depression? Is there a difference in the rates of diagnosis in autistic people compared to autistic people? And how does comorbidity affect how people experience depression? And what ways can you support someone struggling with depression with autism? There are many ways how depression and autism intersect that is not talked about a lot in the media or in teaching spaces, which needs to be explored more in depth. The correlation needs to be considered, especially for caregivers and those on the spectrum, because people on the spectrum are especially susceptible to experience depression. In the population of neurotypical people, there is an estimated of 8.3% of them have experienced major depression. Compared to the 8.3% of neurotypical population, people with ASD are 4 times more likely to experience depression in their lifetime. Why do we need to learn about this? Depression in between people with ASD is very overlooked because they can have overlapping traits and is overshadowed by them. Next is that ASD is more likely to develop in autistic people. Afterwards, we have depression is more likely harder with people who have ASD to overcome. And lastly, there is a large gap of research into this topic and awareness. And this is one way we can support our autistic peers and loved ones. Why are people with ASD more likely to experience depression? And why does it affect autistic people more harshly? An identifying trait of ASD is the difficulty surrounding social connections, which is caused by many factors. One includes social relationships, which is a humongous factor in depression, and there is research that shows that people with problematic relationships have a higher chance to develop major depression disorder. This is important to note because many autistic people, especially high-masking people, tend to have difficulty retaining friendships with others. This is due to a variety of reasons. Not understanding social cues, monotone voice, difficulty with eye contact, meltdowns, and unmasking can lead to making friends very difficult. Many autistic people don't feel like they belong anywhere, and sharing experiences with others releases endorphins and provides a distraction from bad thoughts. This might provide a reason why depression might hit harder for someone who has little to no experience with relationships. Feeling alone is one way people can develop depression and can affect how our brains handle situations. Next is how many autistic people have trouble identifying emotions, which can lead them to be unable to realize that they're experiencing a depressive episode. When they cannot express what they're feeling, it is really hard to get help and that they need, especially if emotions that they're feeling cause them to go nonverbal, or if they're nonverbal all the time. That kind of disrupts the need for help. Another reason is that depression is mostly a reaction to traumatic experience, which flips a switch in your brain to respond to negative stimuli more harshly. People with autism are more susceptible to traumatic experiences, especially from bullying, ostracism, and around 50% of autistic adults have reported for sexual or physical violence. We haven't researched enough to say that it is due to how autistic people process negative stimuli or if traumatic events are more likely to happen to autistic people. But this does explain a bit more why depression is very common between autistic people. Depression is widely associated with suicidal ideation and low self-esteem, and one way autism can heighten these symptoms is pervasive thinking. A trait in ASD is cognitive rigidity, which can manifest in special interest or hyperfixations, but it can also manifest in repeating thoughts of anxiety or bad self-talk. This can culminate towards suicidal ideation and depressive mood, which would explain why autistic people respond worse to negative stimuli and therefore more likely to develop depression. What to look out for to detect depression in autistic individuals, especially if you're a caregiver or a friend, or it's yourself. Number 1 is a change in function. Number 2 is a decreased interest in special interests or safe foods. Number 3 is a major decrease or increase in weight with no reason. Number 4 is feelings of unexplained guilt. Number 5 is a harder time or bigger delay than normal to process information. Number 6 is physical pains like stomach or headaches. Number 7, a feeling of emptiness, hopelessness, loneliness, or sadness for over a 2-week period. This next section is on the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of depression. If you realized you or a beloved one is struggling with depression, here are the measures to take when reaching out for help. The first thing you need to do is contact your family doctor, who can refer you to a psychologist. Number 2 is a psychologist can screen for depression. Number 3, if they get diagnosed, there are multiple treatments that a psychologist can recommend. A couple of treatments for depression is the most popular one is probably antidepressants. They are drugs that allow for the take-up of monoamines, like in Prozac, which allows synapses in the brain to take up more serotonin. This can help chemically balance mood and behavior. Some criticism of antidepressants is that they have many side effects that may cause the user to not be willing to keep taking them, which includes nausea, insomnia, weight gain, and hypermania. These reasons, along with 29 to 46% of people diagnosed with major depression, does not respond to antidepressants at all. Most autistic people respond to antidepressants similarly to neurotypicals, but sometimes SSRIs can cause more impulsive or irritable behaviors. The psychologist may prescribe a low dose to start and increase as needed, because if they aren't sure how the person might respond to them, this is probably a safer bet. The next one is people who get treated for depression should not only count on antidepressants for relief and treatment. Counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy provides them with extra skills to change their perceptions about themselves, and change their behaviors to support healing and change, and break down how they are feeling into something that's easier to understand. One big part of getting autistic people out of depressive behavior and may help prevent developing depression is cognitive behavioral therapy. This is the concept of what we do is directly related to how we feel, introducing a mix of easy and challenging tasks that can be achieved, which reintroduces dopamine into the brain and can help regulate mood and create a sense of worth in themselves. This is especially important because one part of the DSM for major depressive disorder is a sense of worthlessness, and this therapy can be used to relieve some of the symptoms. Prevention. Caregivers or friends is the number one place autistic people count on to support and can do a lot for them to prevent depression. One way to prevent depression is to reintroduce connections into their lives. As stated earlier, a struggle to make or retain relationships is a major factor in why so many autistic people struggle with depression. To contrary belief, autistic people want and need connection, so providing a scheduled time source to find community is the best way to do that. Some places to do that is an autistic support group, creating a club with people who have the same special interest, theater groups, or scheduling time to hang out with beloved friends and family. Creating outside connections is crucial to prevent self-isolation, which is the reason so many people develop depression. Another way is to keep tabs on their behaviors. If there's any changes to functioning or emotional regulation, this is especially true for higher support needs people who have trouble communicating, but all autistic people can struggle with this. You should contact somebody immediately. And lastly, prevention should be the first step to take before the traits of depression can step in. Paying attention to their needs and trying to create pathways of support systems is the best way to quote-unquote cure depression, right at the source sooner rather than later. This one of the last sections is autistic burnout versus depression. So we have a couple of DSM-5 symptoms of depression here. There is 9 of them. Number 1 is depressed mood. 2 is markedly diminished interest or pleasure in most or all activities. Number 3 is significant weight loss or weight gain. Number 4 is insomnia or hypersomnia. Number 5 is psychomotor retardation. Number 6 is fatigue or loss of energy. Number 7 is feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. Number 8 is diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness. And lastly, number 9 is recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal ideation. There's a lot of symptoms of autistic burnout that have very similar traits, especially with fatigue or loss of energy, and insomnia or hypersomnia, which can relate to autistic burnout, which is number 1 we have here is pervasive and long-term exhaustion. Number 9 is sleep disturbances and physical symptoms. A couple other ones is loss of functioning and skill for autistic burnout. This can relate to for the DSM-5 for depression, in psychomotor retardation, and diminished ability to think. There's a lot of similarities between autistic burnout and depression. Symptoms that present similarly on the outside, but the causes are completely different. When autistic people experience burnout, it is a response to overstimuli, and for high-masking individuals using up too much energy on suppressing autistic traits and have none left over to function. Depression is caused by a variety of reasons like genetic, brain chemistry, social, and psychological factors. These things can cause a domino effect that affect the amygdala to start overreacting to negative stimuli and create chemical imbalances. This can cause physical changes in parts of the brain, which controls over other parts of the body. This is the cause for fatigue and loss of energy and executive function and a lot of other things that is seen in depression. Autistic burnout and depression may have similar outcomes, like not being able to get out of bed or not being able to do their job because of their symptoms, but it's important to acknowledge the differences so that the proper treatment can be administered. Lastly, we also have the link between undiagnosed autism and depression. The link between being undiagnosed with autism needs to be further studied because of how much they overlapped. Without a formal diagnosis, undiagnosed autistic people cannot access disability aid, and when they experience burnout, cannot get financial aid for them missing work. Being low income can increase the chances of developing depression. This is believed because of the exposure of worse living conditions, malnutrition, increased social isolation, and there's being no funds to be able to aid them for their treatment. These financial problems can cause a lot of stress as well, creating a situation that can increase rates of depression, especially in groups of late or undiagnosed women and girls. Since females are less likely to receive a diagnosis and therefore treatment, they are the most susceptible to experiencing depression. Girls tend to mask more than boys, which makes it harder to regulate themselves and rapidly increase rates of autistic burnout, and therefore can develop depressive symptoms. So, in conclusion, the disparity in late autism diagnoses for women is an intertwined issue that stems from multiple factors like social, financial, biological, and psychological factors. As the DSM grows to disregard biases against women, I hope that this research can help break down your own views and perspectives around the connections between gender, depression, and autism in a new way. More awareness about this topic can be crucial to help find others their own help and create support systems around these interactions and intersections. This is Leia, and I hope you liked my presentation. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.